When it comes to building websites, most of us fall into two groups. We're either a designer or a developer. Personally, I'm not the best designer out there, but I still need my websites to look good. And this is where Tailwind comes in. There is also other frameworks and libraries available, but many of them enforce their own strict way of doing things. We can write our HTML as we would normally do, and then make use of the carefully designed class names, called utility classes, to provide a clean and professional look to our project, all while staying inside of our HTML. This is especially useful for when a project grows. Rather than consistently thinking of new class names and ever-growing style sheets, Tailwind offers a consistent design system which your whole team can use, providing simple utilities for controlling almost everything, such as spacing, colors, typography, responsive design, and layout. As somebody who admittedly isn't the best designer out there, Tailwind has really helped give my website a professional base to build on, and it's currently my go-to when beginning a new project, allowing me to focus on what I do best. So how does it work? Once Tailwind is included in your project, we'll cover how to do this in the class. Using it in your project is easy. We begin by adding our HTML just as we would normally do to add the content to the screen. This example shows a section containing some text inside. Without any styling, we see in the bottom right corner that this looks pretty boring on the screen. Staying here inside of our HTML, Tailwind provides us with these utility classes which we can apply. Starting with the section wrapper, I've added 3 of these classes which are pretty descriptive for what each one does. Each class does one simple thing, and the first one is BG Grey 800. This sets the background to be grey and then the shade of 800. We'll also look at the colour palettes later in the course too. P6 is a padding value of 6, and we can increase or decrease this number for more or less spacing. And text center is used to center the text contained inside. Of course, the text inside is now hard to read, so we'll move on to styling the P element. Again, we add the class attribute to this element, and just like the outer wrapper, we again make use of the color of grey, but this time we apply the lighter shade of 200. Text LG is for larger text, and font medium is the font weight which we are going to apply. The result is a clean looking section without even writing any CSS code. Of course though, we don't want every site which we create to look the same, and we can still write our own styles if we want to. Tailwind has lots of customization options available to make our site more unique. During this class you will learn about these utilities and so much more that Tailwind has to offer, all while building a dashboard style admin project. Display a list of products available in our store. As we see here, it will be responsive and we will take care of the large and the small screen layout. This class is beginner focused, although you should be comfortable with HTML and CSS before learning Tailwind. Tailwind is a great skill to learn, and I'm looking forward to teaching you all about it during this class. Tailwind is a CSS framework, and therefore it's essential that you at least understand the basics of HTML and CSS before taking this course. If you've used HTML and CSS in the past, either during an existing course, one of my courses, or built any simple project, you should be good to go. There is very little which you need to take this class. If you've built any kind of website in the past, you probably already have these skills which you will need. A text editor is essential, and I'll be using Visual Studio Code. You can download this, or you can use any other which you prefer. If you need to download, the website is over on the right, which is code.visualstudio.com. It's available for free on Mac, Windows and Linux. So if you don't already have one, go ahead and download this. A terminal is also required too. Don't worry if you've never used one, we just need a few simple commands. Visual Studio Code comes with a terminal already pre-built in, or if you already have a standalone terminal which you prefer to use, this is completely fine too. There is no additional tools which we need to subscribe to or purchase, and any other tools or software we need, we will download as we go through the course. When taking any course, it's really important to not get in the habit of following along just for the sake of ticking off another lecture. Take the time to process each lesson, review the code which you write, and think about how you may approach these solutions yourself. With this in mind, this class is project-based, and this gives you the opportunity to really make something personal and unique. You don't need to get too lost and divert away from the class, and you can even take a step back after you've finished the class and come back and make some project changes afterwards. This will really give you a good chance to practice what you've learned away from the class. Also, remember to share your project too here on Skillshare. And not only will I check it out, but it will also inspire fellow students too. For more information on the class project, head into the Project and Resources tab, where you can not only upload your project, but you can also see other class projects too. With this in mind, I look forward to seeing what you create and upload here on Skillshare. To help you better understand what we're going to build through this class, I've created a wireframe sketch which is available for you to download. If you want to, it may be useful to download and keep alongside you as a reference of what we're going to be building during this class. The wireframe shows a basic overall look to how our project will be laid out. Over on the left, we have the full size larger screen view, which has a sidebar on the left and the product detail alongside on the right. Then over on the right hand side of this image, we have a small screen view which has the content stacked and also optimized for smaller screens. Tailwind will also be used for this responsive layout, along with the general styling too. So if you would like to use this as a reference, you can download it now. Also, I have provided the same images which I've used, and these are available to download with this class. You can make use of these, or if you prefer, you can use some of your own to create a different style of project. So if you would like to, go ahead and download these images and also the wireframe. And next, we'll take a look at how to get started with this project and how to also set Tailwind up. Tailwind offers us multiple setup options depending on what we use to build our website and also what features we want to support. This video, we're going to take a look at some of the different setup options. But first, we need to create a new project. The project will need a project folder, and I'm going to create mine on the desktop. So right click, new folder, and you can place this anywhere on your machine which you prefer. Mine will be called the Healthy Juice Bar. And again, this is optional. You can change the theme and the style of your project, but mine's going to be based on a juice bar selling different types of smoothies. Also, from the last video, you should have downloaded the images and the wireframe if you would like to use these. And we can drag these images into the project for later use. So if you do want to use your own, create an images folder, and then you can add the different images inside of here. The only one which you won't have is this picture of me, but you can download a picture of yourself to use in this project. Next, open up your text editor or Visual Studio Code. Drag over the project folder to open this up. And then, as always, we're creating a new website. We need to create a new file, which is our index.html. You can use the Command or Control N shortcut, which will create a new page. Or if you want to, you can hover over the title in the sidebar and use this icon to create a new page. Give this a save. And this is the index.html. So just before we start writing any code, if we take a look at the wireframe, what we need to do is to first decide what we're going to create first. We can see by these images we have two distinct sections. We have the sidebar area, and we also have this main content area over on the right. The same with the smaller screen, we have the sidebar which is on top, and then the main content area just below. So we have two distinct sections which we need to create. So back to our index page, if you are using Visual Studio Code, you can make use of the built-in emmet command, which is a shortcut to create our HTML boilerplate. This is HTML, 5, hit enter, and this will give us the basic structure which we need. The document title is Healthy Juice Bar. And as we just seen before, inside of the body section, we have our two main sections, and the first one is the aside element. And also alongside this, at the main content section. Let's begin work inside of the aside section, where we're going to add a little content to work with. As we can see inside the sidebar on the wireframe, we have a logo or a image at the very top of the sidebar, and then the title just below. And this is the same for both of the layouts. So the aside, create the image element, and inside of the supplied images folder, we have a image which is the logo.png. The alt text, and then just below our image, as we just seen, we'll create a level 1 heading for the site title. This is the Healthy Juice Bar, or the name of your choice. Let's open this up in the browser. First of all, save this file, and then I'm going to copy the path to this, open up Google Chrome, and then paste this inside. So a pretty standard look as expected. We have the image and our title, and now what we're going to do is to head over to the Tailwind documentation and see how we can set this up in our project. So for the Tailwind installation, we need to go to tailwindcss.com. And from the home page, we have a link here to the documentation. From the documentation, the page which we need is this installation link just here. This installation page has some different guides on how we can set Tailwind up using different frameworks and libraries. So for example, if you're using Vue or React or Gatsby, we have some dedicated installation guides for these. We're going to be keeping it simple and just include Tailwind into a regular HTML project, starting with the simplest way, which is to use a CDN link. So over on the right, head down to the link which is using Tailwind via CDN. This is going to give us a style sheet link which we can use to drop directly into our project. A CDN is a content delivery network, and it's a way of having our content, in our case the Tailwind CSS file, available across the world in multiple servers or data centers. If we just copy this link and paste this into a new tab, this is the CSS file which we're linking to. Of course, at the moment it does look a little bit of a mess because it's not formatted. We'll take a better look at this in the text editor very soon. But the key thing to note here is we are linking to a Tailwind CSS file which is hosted on an external server, rather than downloading this file and including it in our project. So for now, let's copy this full link from the documentation, and then we can paste this inside of the head section of our index page. Give this a save, and now if we go over to our project, refresh the browser, instantly we see a slight change to our content. And this is a good thing because it now means the Tailwind CSS file has now taken effect. And the reason we see a change initially is because of a set of base styles which Tailwind will apply. These base styles are not really intended to add style into our project, but instead they are a set of styles to make our site render more consistently across different browsers. If you've used a normalized CSS file in the past, a lot of it is based off this. So what about Tailwind utility classes? Well, these are also available with the CDN link too, and we're going to now take a look at some simple examples inside of here. So first of all, we'll work on the aside section, and all we need to do is to add a regular class attribute, and then add our first utility class, which is p-4. Now if we refresh the browser, we can see a padding value of 4 has been applied to this element. So simple enough. The next thing to take a look at is to add a background, and we can do this with BG, followed by the color, which I'm going to use as grey, and then the shade of grey, which is 800. We will take a deeper look into all these shades and colors in a future video, but for now, this should apply to our aside section, giving us this dark grey background color. The image, move down to the image element and add our class in. The image will need a height and a width, and using Tailwind this is relatively straightforward. We use H for height, a value of 32, and we will take a look at what all of these values mean very soon. The width we can also do with W, and to make this square we'll keep this as the same value. Refresh, and the size has now taken effect. Since we have this dark background grey colour, we also need to add some classes to our H1 to make this stand out on this dark background. For the white colour we can add text-white. Refresh and this instantly takes effect. We can also transform this to be uppercase with this utility. We have utility classes available for almost any type of CSS property which you want to add. We can set the font weight, and in this case let's go for font medium. Save, and this should be a little bit bolder than it was previously. We have lots of different text sizing options, and for this heading I'm going to go for text 2XL. The last one for the level 1 heading is going to be tracking wider, and this will add some extra spacing between our letters. So we can already start to see by adding some simple utility class names, we can really make a big difference to the styling of our site. This CDN link which we've set up at the top is great for learning Tailwind, and it will be fine for the majority of this course, and also some simpler projects too. But there is also some drawbacks of using it. We can see some of these if we go back to the Tailwind documentation. We can see some of the drawbacks here which we have when using the CDN link, such as we can't use any directives such as apply, which we're going to take a look at later on in the course. And also, we cannot do something called tree shaking, which is a way to remove any unused styles from our final build, meaning the file size will be larger. So to help with this, we're going to install Tailwind using the CLI. So click on the Tailwind CLI link on the right. And to do this, we need to install Node.js, and we also need to make use of a few terminal commands. This can often scare people off, but it's really just a few simple steps, which I'm going to guide you through. Let's start by installing Node.js, which is available from nodejs.org. I already have Node.js set up on my computer, but if you don't already have this installed, go ahead and download the latest version now, and come back once this has been done. Okay, once this is done, you can either open up your own terminal which you want to use, or in my case, I'm going to keep it simple. And in Visual Studio Code, if we go to the terminal option, open up a new terminal from here. So once you open up the terminal inside of Visual Studio Code, this should automatically open up inside of your project directory. Step 1 is to first make sure we have successfully installed Node.js. The way to do this inside of the terminal is to write the command which is node-v. And if this returns back a version number, this means we successfully installed Node.js. The next thing we need to do is to run the Tailwind CLI. And for this, let's go back over to the docs. We can see here we have a command, and we need to copy this and add this inside of the terminal. This npx tool is available since we've just downloaded Node.js, which also comes bundled with npm and this npx tool. So let's grab this full command, copy this and paste this inside of the terminal. Hit enter. We can agree to installing the Tailwind package, and just give us a few moments to set things up. Once this finishes, we can go into the sidebar, and we can see we now have this tailwind.css file. This is the same CSS file which we used earlier when we linked to this with the CDN. We can now see it more clearly since this is formatted inside of the editor. And the first thing we see up at the very top is the set of base styles, which is used to render our site more consistently across different browsers. It does things like resetting any padding and margin values. It will set up default font families and generally give a consistent appearance to our HTML elements. But what about the utility classes which we've just used? Well, let's do a search. One of the ones which we used before is this background color of grey. Let's go over to our CSS file. Use Command or Control F to use the Finder. Let's search for our BG Grey 800, and further down the CSS file, or 15,000 lines into it, we can see we have a reference to this class. And this is setting our grey background colour. Just above we have the shade of 700, which is a lighter version, and we can see, if we scroll up a little bit further, we have all of these options, which is from grey shade 50, all the way up to 900, which is the darkest. We then have the red versions with all of the same shade values. You will also find lots of other colours too. Something else we've already used is the height class. Let's do a search for H-32 and take a look for the very first occurrence. And for each one of these values, such as 32 or 28, these will all correspond to a single height value, which is in rems. So in our case, the H32, which we've applied to our image, will apply 8 rems of height. And we can increase or decrease these values to give us a different rem value. Let's look at one more. We also had font medium just here. Do a search and we can see the font weight of 500 has been applied. We also have extra light, we have light, normal, semi-bold, bold, and also extra bold too. So now we have our own copy of our Tailwind file in the project. What we need to do is to replace this CDN link. So remove this, and since our Tailwind file is directly alongside our index, we can link to this with the name of tailwind.css. Save this. Refresh the browser. And all of our same Tailwind styles are still applied, but this time we've replaced the CDN link with our own local version. Constantly adding new things to our project, saving the file, going over to the browser and then refreshing to see any updates can over time become really time consuming. So this is why I wanted to quickly show you a plugin which is available from Visual Studio Code, which we can use to save us some time. This plugin will allow us to make changes to our editor, hit save, and then a live server will constantly keep our project updated inside of the browser. Installing this is optional and you don't need to set this up if you don't want to. Instead, you can just carry on refreshing the browser after any editor changes. If you do want to install this to save a little bit of time, what you can do is to go into the extensions button just here. I already have this plugin set up, which you can see here. If you don't, do a search at the top for live server and then click on this option just here. Since mine is already set up and enabled, you can see the disable button at the top, but if this is the first visit to this plugin, you should see the enable button just here. To then run this extension and set up our project with the live server, all we need to do is to click on this go live button at the bottom. This should then open this up in the default browser and then keep track of any changes to our site. So for example, if we go ahead and change our background to be red, hit save, and this will be automatically updated inside the browser without needing to refresh. Let's just reinstate this grey colour from the project. And this is just a tool which I like to use, and I hope you find it useful too. Just like with many other modern frameworks, Tailwind also has the concept of mobile first design. This means we start by designing for the small screen view to begin with, and then as we get more screen space available, we can add or override any of the existing styles. This can make sense because a lot of the core styling will remain for all screen sizes, such as the colours and fonts, and we can just make some layout or sizing changes when we have more screen space available. Back to the wireframe and looking at the small screen over on the right, this is what we are going to begin with. The layout for this doesn't actually need a lot of work, since a lot of website elements tend to naturally flow this way anyway. We already have a logo at the top and also the title, so next we move down to the menu. Back to the project, and since we are dealing with the small screen view, we can shrink down the browser, take up only the minimum width, and what we're going to do is go to the aside section just below the level 1 heading. And here we can create our links inside of the unordered list. For now, we'll create our list items and we have 6 different links. And these are just going to be unstyled for now. So the first one, again with no utility classes, pass in the link. And for now, we don't have any extra pages to link these to, so an empty href is fine. The first link is for products. The second, list item. This one is going to have the content of orders. Number 3. This one is for the inventory, and next we have the customers. Number 5 is for the analytics. And the last one is going to be for coupons. Save this and you can either refresh, or I'm going to start off the live server. We can see at the top our 6 links. And as mentioned before, when we use HTML on its own, it can generally fall pretty good for a small screen view in terms of layout. We just need to add some styling to make it look good. And to make it look good, we're going to need some Tailwind utilities. To see a list of all the utilities we have access to, head over to the Tailwind homepage and then click on the documentation link. The Tailwind docs is a great reference for all the utility classes, and I've been using Tailwind for some time now, and I still use it as a reference. Over on the left, we have a list of all of the utility sections we have available, such as if we want to make use of the flexbox, which we will be soon, we can use spacing utilities, sizing utilities, different typography, such as the font sizes, the font colors, the font family, and also lots of different effects and borders we can add to. So of course there is lots of different sections here, but the one we're going to be focusing on is the color palette. So let's do a search up at the top for the color palette, and this is the one we need just here. And then scroll down, we can see a list of all the colors we have available. We've already used some of these in our project, such as the gray color, and we can see these have a shade from 50 all the way to 900, just like we're seeing inside of the Tailwind CSS. You can see all of the different colors we have available to start with, and these will suit lots of different use cases. All of these colors which you're just seeing can be applied to lots of different things. First, we select a color such as red and the shade of 400, and then on the right we have some applications for this color. We have the BG prefix, which we've used to set the background color. We also have the text prefix to set the text color, and also if we want a border, we can use the color for this too. So this is a nice way of keeping things consistent in our project. We always have access to all of these colors and shades, and we can then just use a different prefix to apply it to different sections. Back to the project, let's apply some colors to our links and shrink this down. First, we'll set the text color for each one of these links. So we need to jump into the A element, add the class attribute, and the first one, we'll start with the prefix of text, the color, followed by the shade. There's our first one, and often what we want to do with these type of links is to create a different style or a different effect when the user hovers over the text. For this, I'm going to apply a hover effect. The way to do these is to apply any one of these utility classes, just like we would normally do, but we add the hover prefix followed by the colon. So for example, if we wanted to change the background, we would use BG and set the color we want to apply. I'm going to go for grey 700. Save, and now when we hover over the products, we can now see the background color change. We could also add as many hover states as we want to, and since we're changing the background color, I'm also going to change the text color too. Again, place in the hover state followed by the colon. Let's change this to be text white. And we can try this out in the browser. As soon as we hover over this, we can see a subtle change to the text color. Okay, so I'm happy with this for now, so we can apply this to all of our links. Let's just copy this class section from our first link and place this in all of the rest of these links. Okay, make sure this is in all 6, and we can see this now applies inside the browser. As well as this hover prefix, and just like with regular CSS, We can also target other states too. Instead of hover, we could change this to another state such as active or focus, and we do this in the exact same way. Just before we move on to the next video to look at some spacing, there is a few elements which we first need to add to this section inside the wireframe. And if we look at the links at the very top which we just added, next to the orders link we see a number 5. This is to show how many orders we currently have available, and it also has this circle background too. And then after the last link we can also see this gear icon, which is a link to the settings. So let's start with the number icon, which goes just after our orders link. So place this in and still within our list item, and then place the content as the number 5. We can just about see this on the screen, but this is a bit too dark, so we need to add some utility classes. For the text, I'm going to apply a green color with the shade of 900, and also add a green background color too. So BG, green, and this time the shade of 100. The font size we can apply with text-SM to give it the small size. And then to pad out the background color of green, let's add a padding value, which is going to be equal to 1.5. So we're starting to get somewhere in the browser now. If we look at this, we have a square color, but we also need to round the edges. Using Tailwind utility classes, we first of all have the rounded class, and this gives it a small rounded edge. We also have different rounded sizes. For example, we can apply a large rounding, and this is a little bit bigger, but we can also make this fully rounded too with rounded-full. Okay, so this is fine, and the last thing to do is to place the gear icon down at the bottom, and this is just below our coupons link. And also make sure this is outside of the unordered list. Again, this can be placed inside of a span element, and for the gear icon, this is going to be a HTML entity. A HTML entity is a way of including an icon in our project, and we can apply these using certain codes. If you are unsure about using HTML entities, a quick Google search will give you lots of websites where you can find out the available codes which you can use. So for us, the code which we need to apply is the ampersand, the hash, the value of 9881, followed by the semicolon. You should now see a gear icon at the bottom here, and just to make this a little bit bigger, we can use a Tailwind utility class of text, and the size of this text will be 2XL. There we go, the content is now in place, but all of this content which we just added looks a little bit too bunched up. And this is where spacing utilities come in, and this is what we'll look at next in more detail. When designing or building any website, spacing is always an important consideration, and with regular CSS we have both margin and also padding to help control this. And as we've briefly looked at in the previous videos, Tailwind also provides some handy utility classes too. Starting with padding, which is the spacing inside of an element. We can add padding to all 4 sides of an element using P followed by a value. We'll see what these values are in just a moment, but below this, you can also see that we can apply padding to one single side too, either at the top, right, bottom, or the left. As a little shortcut, we can also apply padding to 2 sides. If you've used any coordinates in the past, you will be familiar with the X and the Y axes. X is horizontally, so this applies padding to the left and right, and the Y axis adds padding to both the top and the bottom. For margin, this works just the same, but we use the M prefix rather than the P. Again, we can add padding to all sides, or control them individually, and also to either the left and right together, or we can group the top and bottom. But what about these values such as 4? Are they pixels, M, rem, or some other unit? Well, these all relate to a rem value, which we can see in the CSS file. We can see what these values are exactly if we go into the sidebar, and then open up the Tailwind CSS file. From here, let's search for some of our spacing utilities. Let's go for P-0, and let's take a look for the very first occurrence. So cycle through these, and what we're looking for is the P-0 class, which we've just seen in the slides, And as expected, this applies a padding value of 0. So then after each additional size, we have 1, we have 2, we have 3. Each one of these adds a different padding value in rem. So a quarter of rem, half a rem, 3/4, and 1 rem is P-4. These are all going up in quarter increments, and they go all the way up. If we scroll to the very last one, this is a value of 96, which applies padding of 24 rem. So if you do want to know exactly what any of these values are, just have a quick search inside the file. We have in fact already used some of these padding values inside of our index page. We use a padding value of 4 with the aside elements, and let's go ahead and add some more spacing to this project. For the title, some spacing at the top and bottom, which we're going to apply with margin Y. This is in the H1, and let's place this at the very end. So margin, the Y axis, and then the value of 4. Save. And some spacing now applies at the top and bottom of our heading. And the same for each one of these links. For these links, we're also going to use a padding value rather than margin. This is because if we hover over any one of these links, we can see we have a small background applied. We want this background to be a little bit larger to surround the text. So let's apply a padding value of 2. P-2. And if we hover over this link, we can see the padding has applied. So a couple of things to note here. First of all, the product text has been pushed over from the left. But this is fine for now because we're going to move all of the text into the center of this section very soon. And also very soon we're going to apply some spacing between each one of these links. We can also apply the rounded utility class to this link too. We can see this better if we hover over, and we can see the rounded edges on this background. So now if we apply this to all 6 of our links, copy the padding and the rounded class, and add this to our second link. This is for the span, so we'll leave this. The third link, 4, 5, and 6. And we can just test this before we move on. So great, so this is all working, and the next thing to do is to add the vertical spacing between each one of these links. One way to do this is to add some margin to each one of these links. Or even easier, Tailwind provides a utility called space between. When we have many child elements like this, such as multiple links, we usually want some spacing between each one. But some of the common solutions have issues. For example, we could try adding some margin to the bottom of each link. This works, but also note the extra margin at the very bottom, which we may not want. Margin top causes the same issue, but leaves the extra space at the top, which also may not be wanted. So what about using the margin Y utility? Well, this is probably even worse because it also adds the extra spacing at the beginning and the end, and also the space between each link is doubled. Tailwind's space utility solves these problems by only adding an equal amount of spacing between each element. This example is spaced vertically on the Y axis, but we can also have space across the page using space X. And rather than using multiple classes and applying these to each one of the links, we can also add a single space between class, and this goes on the parent. In our case, it would be the unordered list. So let's locate this unordered list just up at the top, add the class, add the space utility, and since we want the space on the Y axis, we add space Y, and the value, which is 4. And this now gives us some nice equal spacing between each one of these links. As you can imagine, we will be using spacing utilities very regularly. And next, we'll see how we can use the CSS Flexbox with Tailwind. This wireframe shows that the big layout change occurs with the sidebar and the main content. Small screens are generally stacked vertically, and the big screen view is side by side. A common way to do this is with the CSS Flexbox, and Tailwind also has utility classes to do this too. The two sections which we're going to switch around is the aside section, and also scrolling down alongside this is the main section. We can see that both of these sections are child elements of the body. So let's apply the Flexbox to this section. We can apply a class, and this is going to contain 2 classes. The first one is Flex, and the second one is flex col. So the first one of flex, this will apply the display type of flex, and then flex col. This is the same thing as setting the flex direction to be column, which we need for the small screen layout. And this will apply to the aside and the main section. So now if we save this, and inside the browser, we don't see much of a change at the moment. We don't see much of a difference because the content is already laid out in this way, but we will change this from flex col to flex row in a later video. And as mentioned in the previous video, the next thing to do for the small screen view is to place all the content in the center. The way to do this is to go to the aside section, and this already has the class, so we'll just add some additional ones at the end. Again, making use of the display type of flex. If we save this, the default for the flex box is flex row. So therefore, if we go to the browser, we can see all this content is placed across the page. Just like above with the body section, we can also flip this to be flex col and place the content as columns. To center the text, we can use text center, and this will apply to our heading and also our links. So the text is centered, but we also need to center the image too. So since the image's parent, which is the aside, is currently making use of the flex box, if we now go down to the image, we can also use a flex property called self-center. Self-center is exactly the same as if we had our own CSS file, and we set the image to be align self-center. We can see this if we go into the developer tools, right click and inspect. Let's hover over the image element, and this has applied the align self value to be center. So this now leaves us with pretty much where we need to be for the small screen view, and also with the aside section. So let's move further down onto the main content. You can see we have a user's name and avatar, the all products title, and then 2 buttons to work with the products. And Flexbox will also be useful for this section too. Now we can go just below the aside section and take a look for the main element. Open this up and we can place our new content inside. So for the avatar, you will need a picture of yourself to include in the images folder. Inside of mine, I have an image called me.jpg. If you don't have a personal image to use for the avatar, you can instead just use one of these smoothie images as a placeholder. So now let's create the avatar section, which will be surrounded in a div. This div will contain the avatar image. So jump into the images folder, and the one as mentioned was me.jpg. The alt text. And then inside of these small tags, we're going to place in it the user's name. Add this in, hit save, and there's the image and also the text just below. So to make this section look more like we want to, we need to also add some Tailwind utilities. So for the wrapper inside the div, first of all, some margin to the top of this element of 4. This will give it some spacing at the very top, and also we can make use of the flexbox. So this flexbox will instantly make these 2 elements appear in a row, since the default flex direction is row. Of course, the image is also far too big, so we can add the class, and we can again make use of the width and the height utilities inside of here. So the height, a value of 8, and also the same for the width. Just like we used for the number of orders, we can also apply a rounded edge to this image. So add the rounded value. You can add any rounded value inside of here. I'm just going to keep this as full to add a circle. Next, back to the parent, we need to align these into the center of the content and also align these vertically too. So inside the div and just after the flex, set the justify content to be center. This will place all the contents into the center of this section. And then we also need to take care of the vertical alignment. We can do this by using item center. And this will place the text in the center of our image. Finally, onto the text, we'll just add a class inside of here. And this will be to set the text color. Let's go for gray 500. And to also give this some spacing from the image, set the margin on the x-axis to be a value of 4. Good, so moving down from this avatar section, we're going to create a new section which is going to be a main wrapper for all of the rest of the content. So inside the main section, and just after the final div, create a new div element. And this is going to be the container for all of the content, including the table. And to keep things organized, we'll just place a quick comment just above. We'll say container for all the main content, including the table. And then inside of this div, placing a new div inside. This is also going to be a container. So we'll also add a comment at the top. This container will be used to align the all products title alongside all of the buttons. So the comment will say container to align the buttons and heading. And then first of all, we'll place the heading inside. The heading will be a H2 and the text of all products. Below this, a div which is going to contain the buttons. So the first one, placing the button element, and this will be the text of add. Next to this, we also need the plus icon, and once again, we can make use of a HTML entity. For the plus symbol, we can use the ampersand, the hash, the value of 43, the semicolon, and then this will add this plus icon inside the button. So we have this all products title at the very top, and then this div has the first button of add, and then also alongside this we have the select option. So just after the button, place it in our select, and this select needs various options. The first option is going to be the one which the user first sees, and this one is going to be bulk actions. Duplicate this, and the second one is going to be for edit. And the final one is going to be to delete a product. Let's give this a try. We see the drop down and also our add button next to this. Let's now go back to our HTML and apply some utility classes to make this look better. So first of all, the main content wrapper, which is the one at the very top. We can add some spacing on the left and right with px-2. Then also to apply some space to this avatar section, we can also apply some margin to the top. Let's go for 8. Next, the div wrapper, which contains the heading and also the buttons. And to add some alignment to this section, we can make use of the flex box. Change the direction to be flex column. And then we can begin to align our content. First of all, item center. This will move all the content into the center of this section when we have the direction set to column. To add some space in between these, we'll go down to the level 2 heading and apply some margin just onto the bottom of the element with MB4. Okay, down to the very last section, and we can begin to work on our button and also the select input. So first of all, the button, this will have the text color of gray 100. This light grey colour doesn't stand out too good on the white background colour, but we're going to be changing the background colour to be indigo, the shade of 500, and this makes the button stand out. Also, a hover state will again change the background colour to be a lighter shade of indigo. Let's go for 400. Okay, good. We also need some padding on the inside of this, and also to round the corners. So the padding on the left and right, the value of 4. We'll shrink the text to be a small size. And then finally add the rounded edges. Good, this looks a lot better now, and onto the select. So down to the opening tag. The name and the ID doesn't really matter at the minute because we're not sending our form to a server, but we'll just add the name of bulk and also the ID to be the same. The classes. To match our button, we'll keep the text to be a small size. Apply some margin left to keep this spaced away from the button. A padding value of 4 on the x-axis, and then we'll also set a border to make this stand out. So to apply a border, we just use the border utility class, and we can also play around with the color too. As we looked at earlier with the color utilities, we can use the border prefix and then use any one of our colors which we want to. Let's go for grey, -300. Give this the rounded edge. And then we can make use of the focus state. So when this element is in focus, we're going to remove the outline and instead replace this with a focus state, which includes an indigo border with the value of 500. Okay, if we go up to the browser, this is looking a lot better now, and we'll just add some more spacing to the y-axis of these elements. So let's do this inside of the select. Alongside the padding, we'll add some padding on the y-axis. Let's try a value of 2. Good, we'll also do the same for the button. And this now looks much better. Just to test out the focus, if we click in the browser and then use the tab button to cycle through all of our elements. Once we get to this select input, we can see the focus outline, which we've changed to be the indigo border, giving the user a visual indication of which element is selected. We're now making good progress with the content and also the small screen view. And next, we're going to begin working inside of our table. The wireframe for the small screen over on the right has a table which we're going to now work on. Tables of data for this kind of product could also contain many more columns too. And since the width of the screen on a small device is limited, rather than reduce the size of this table and try to squeeze everything on this small screen, I think the best thing to do in this case is to allow the user to swipe to the right to view the rest of the table data. In the previous video, we added this comment at the top around this div, which was the main container. So this contains all the content which we created and also the table. So what we need to do is to locate the closing tag, which is just above the main, and keep this table section inside. So for this, create a new section and then inside our table. The reason we've added this surrounding section around our table is to add an overflow class. And we'll see the result of this in just a second if we add the class and the utility of overflow-x-auto. This utility is the same as the regular CSS overflow x property, and we've set the value to auto. This means if the content is too wide for the screen, which will be the case for our table, rather than hide the table or cut it off, a scroll bar will then be introduced. Inside the table, add our first element, which is t-head, and this is going to be the wrapper for all of our table headings. Place in a class of bg gray 100, and then inside of here we add our first row. With tables, we use the tr for table row, and then each one of the headings will be surrounded in the th element. So the first one, if you remember from our wireframe, is the item. The second one, the status of the item, and the third one is for the category, the stock level, the price, and then finally a edit button. So let's save this and see what happens inside the browser. I'm going to set up the live server to open this up and update the changes. There's our table heading across the page. As expected, we need to add some utility classes to make this look a lot better. So for the th elements, for the headings, place in the class. And first of all, some padding on the x-axis of 6. Align the text over on the left, and we can also make the text extra small. Font medium to make this stand out, and a little bit bolder, and then a color for the text, which is going to be gray 500. Transform this to be uppercase, and then at the very end we're going to add one more utility class, which is going to be tracking wider. And if you take a close look at the item before we save this, hit save, and this will increase the letter spacing. Okay, so with this one now in place, we'll copy the full class attribute and add this to each one of our table headings. So the second one, the category, the stock, the price, and finally the edit section. If you remember from the wireframe, the first cell over on the left also has a checkbox to select all of our items. This is going to be inside of the first table heading. So just before the item text, we'll place in the input. The input is the type of checkbox. Save this, and also to give some space in to the text, which is just alongside, we can also add the class to give it some margin on the right and the value of 4. So what we now have is a table heading with two pieces of information. We have the input and also the text. So we also need to do some alignment to make these appear alongside each other inside of the cell. So we can add some padding and alignment to this section. So just above in the class, we'll add some padding on the y-axis, the value of 4. This gives us a little bit more vertical spacing. And now we need to figure out a way to place the checkbox alongside our item text. Well, we can do this by changing the table heading to make use of the flexbox. And remember, by default, the flexbox has the flex direction of row. This means that both of the child elements will be placed alongside each other in a row, leaving our head section now completed and our table now ready to add some data in the upcoming video. Moving down from the table head section and onto the body, where we can add each product line, and you can also add in as many of these products as you would like to. Over to the editor, and we can begin to add this section. So in the last section, we created the table heading, and if we locate the closing tag for this element, we can then get to work on the body section. So just below the T head, add in the T body, and then place inside a class which will give this the white background color. Inside, our first row with the TR element. And the first piece of table data contains three things. It contains a checkbox. So we'll add the input with the type of checkbox. And this is going to sit just below this one here. Alongside our checkbox, we'll add the image element. And the image element is going to be the picture which we want to place next to each smoothie. Finally, the P element. And let's go for the mango smoothie. Whoops, this is just above the table. We actually need to cut all three of these out of place and place these inside of a cell which is TD for table data. Paste these in, and they should now fix our issue. The cell also needs some classes to make these align properly. So since we want all three of these items to go across the page, we can again make use of the flexbox. And then also align these vertically using item center. Some padding on the x-axis, and we'll go for value of 6. Also padding y of 4. So the checkbox is fine as it is, and we'll move down to the image and jump into the images folder. We have an image inside of here which is the mango.jpg, and this is the image which I'm going to place next to this item. The alt text of mango smoothie, and also some classes to this element. So for our image, we need to make it a little bit smaller. So we can do this with H-10 for the height. And also the same for the width too, to keep this equal. And then if we look at our image inside the browser, we also need some spacing on either side. We can do this with the margin property on the x-axis and a value of 4. Next, down to our text, we'll also add some classes into the P element. First of all, make the text to be a small size. The font weight of medium, the text color of grey 800. For the letter spacing, also use the tracking wider utility, which we looked at just before. And then a class which we've not used so far, which is whitespace -no wrap. You'll see as soon as we save this that the mango smoothie text will appear on the same line. So this means it stops the text wrapping onto a new line if it's too long for the actual cell. The next piece of data is just under the status, and this is going to be a green active label. So let's go just below our TD, add a new piece of table data. And we also need to add some classes into this section. We're not going to mirror the classes from the first one, because remember this needed to make use of the flexbox to align our three items inside. So let's go back down and we can add our classes. This one is going to be text left, text small, just to keep it consistent. Some padding on the left and right of 6. Tracking wider. And also white space, no wrap. Inside of this cell, add a span element with the text of active. So to make this look more like a button, we're going to go into the span element and add some classes. First, we'll change the text color to be green, shade of 900, and and then offset this with a lighter background. This is also green, but the value of 100. A padding value of 4 on X, and then for Y, a value of 2. And then round the edges with rounded -full. Okay, that looks good. And also, if we make the browser smaller than the actual width of the table, you'll notice this scroll bar at the bottom. As mentioned, this is the scroll bar to make all the content come into play. We have this because if we go to the start of our table, let's scroll up. Remember, we added a section wrapper around this, which has the class of overflow x auto. The next section we have is the category. So back down, just below the last piece of table data, add a new cell. And from here we can start to keep the styling more consistent. We can grab the classes from the last table data, paste these in, and then in between the tags we can add the text of smoothies. Save. So this is a pretty simple one, it just contains the text inside. And now we'll go across and we'll add the section for the stock. To keep things consistent, copy the full TD elements from above, paste this in below, and then insert NA inside of here, since we're not tracking the stock levels for these smoothies. What's next? We'll go across and take a look. This is the price. Paste in a new TD element with the same classes. Add a price for our smoothie. And then finally, over on the right, just below the edit section, this is going to be an edit button. This can also make use of the same classes, so paste in a TD. But this time, this also needs a link. Since we don't have any pages to link to, we can just leave the href empty. But we do need to add some classes for styling. The text of edit, and then back to our classes, we can start to add a different text color. So text, indigo 500. And also a darker shade once the user hovers over this section. So text, indigo, and this time we'll go for a value of 900. Okay, good. This is all working, and this is our first item. And you can now go ahead and add as many items as you would like to. And we have multiple images supplied in the images folder. If you wanted to practice, you could either type out all of this section again, or you could copy and paste this full row section and then change the details inside. The easiest way to do this, if we go to the table body section, which we just created, and then inside we need to directly copy this table row. So copy all of the contents, the closing table row tag, copy this just below, paste a new one just inside, and we'll go through this once more. This one's going to be for the strawberry smoothie. Let's take a look. Rather than mango, we'll change this to be strawberry. The active button is fine. This is still in the smoothies category. You can change the price if you want to, but I'm just going to leave this as it is. And all we need to do now is just to change this image. So scroll up. This time we want to change the image source to be the strawberry.jpg, and also change the alt text too. Okay, so we won't make this video really long and go through all of these options, but you can now go ahead and add as many of these as you want to, and make use of the images inside of the folder. But just before we finish this video, we can also add a divider line between each one of our items. So we can do this if we locate the table body section, which we created at the start of this video, alongside the background. Add a class which is divide-y. Straight away when we save this, we see the line has been placed between each one of these items. We can also change the color of this divide too. All we need to do is to use the divide prefix and then add any color. I'm going to use grey-200. And this divide is really useful for adding a dividing line between each one of the child elements inside of here. As you can see, we can make use of the horizontal or the vertical divides by using Y or X. The handy thing about this divide is it will only add a line between each one of the elements. It wouldn't add a line at the beginning or at the end, which would happen if we use something like a border bottom. If you did also want a dividing line between the table head and the table body, we could also add the same two utility classes, but this time to the parent element. In our case, the parent is the table. So copy both of these utilities, and then the parent of our head And our body section is the table. So locate this, add the class attribute, and then we can paste in our utilities. And then over on the right, we can now see this utility has placed a divide between the head and the body section. Good, so we're getting somewhere now. There is just a little bit more content to add just below this table. So we can carry on with adding more products if you want to. And then once completed, I will see you in the upcoming video. The final piece of content on this mobile view over on the right is going to be the small section down at the bottom. So we'll have some text which is saying how many products we are showing, how many products we're having total, and also the section to flip between each one of these pages. On the small screen view, this is stacked vertically, so we have the text on top and then the pagination at the bottom. We need to insert this section down at the bottom, so if we take a look for the closing main tag, and then just above this final div, we can then place in a new section for all of this content, starting with the P element, which is the text. So we'll say showing 10 of 108 products. Remember, this is completely fictional, so you can change the numbers. Next, the unordered list, or first list item. And then each page can be inserted as a link. We don't have any pages to link to, so we can keep this empty. And the first one is the number 1. Let's copy this and paste this in to create 4 different links. Add page number 2, page 3, and also 4. Save. And there's our content down at the bottom. So remember from the wireframe that to the left of this number 1, we have the left angle bracket, and then to the right of the number 4, we have the right angle bracket. What we're going to do to insert these is to include a span, and we'll insert this inside the list element and just above the number 1. We can insert this with a HTML entity, use ampersand, LT, and a semicolon. To give this some spacing to our number 1, also add the class, which is margin right and the value before. Let's go down to the last list item. And this one is going to go after our number 4. Insert the span. The entity this time is the ampersand and GT, greater than the semicolon. This will also have some margin, but this time we need to place it on the left. Okay, let's now get to work on the layout of this section, and if we start at the main wrapper, we can make use of the flexbox to control this on the small and the large screen view. For the small screen, like most of the content, this will be laid out as columns. The items will be in the center. Add some spacing on the top and bottom at the padding Y value of 6. The text will be a little bit smaller, so we'll use text-SM and also a lighter weight too. The text just below is fine, so we'll move on to the unordered list, and the numbers need to be placed across the page. For this, we'll also make use of the flexbox, and the default flex direction is row, which places these across the page, and we'll add some spacing to the text above with MT-4. So there's not a lot more left to do for this section. We'll just add some spacing to these numbers, and we'll do this inside the A element and the class of P-2. And we can also copy this and add this to each one of our numbers. Good, so just as a finishing touch for this section, we're going to highlight this number 1. And this is just to let the user know exactly which page they will be on. And as ever, we'll do this by adding some utilities. First, we'll change the text color to be grey, the shade of 100, the background with BG, indigo, -500. The hover effect will also make this an indigo color, but just like we did with the edit button, this will be a slightly different shade. So the hover state for this element, the background, indigo -400, and round off the edges with rounded -full. Okay, good. This is the final section now complete, and also all the content which we need for this project. Going forward, what we're going to do is make this content more suitable for larger screens, and also learning about more of the features which Tailwind has to offer. Just a few little things though before we move on. Starting with the background for this main section. Let's locate the opening main tag, which is near the top of the body. So there's the side. And the main section, placing a class which is going to be BG Gray-200. So we could keep it simple like this if we wanted to and add a single shade of grey or any other colour. Or if we wanted to, we could also set this up as a gradient. Gradients are available in regular CSS and allow us to blend between two or more different colours. You can go extreme and blend between two opposite colours, but I'm going to keep things nice and subtle and change between two similar shades. So the way we can do this, instead of the grey colour, is to set the background to be a gradient, followed by the direction of the gradient. Mine is going to be 2-R, and this will change colour from left to right. If you wanted to, you could also change this to be the top, the bottom, or left, along with combining them two. For example, TR would be the top right, and TL would be the top left. For the space in between, we then use the to and from to set the colours which you want to use. To make it more visible, let's add a red and blue value to begin with. So we'll say from red 200, and then we'll go to a blue value of 100. So this now makes it more visible. We have the red colour which we started from over on the left, and then we move over to the right direction and transform this to be the blue colour which we see here. But as mentioned, I'm going to keep this a little bit more subtle and change both of these to be grey. But do feel free to play around with any of these colours or any other pieces of styling which you want to. Okay, moving on, we also need to add some spacing just above this table. If we scroll down just a little bit, we can see we have the container which we created earlier, and this is used to wrap our buttons. To add some spacing, we can add some margin onto the bottom of this section with a value of 6. To round off this video, just like we have done with this number 1 at the bottom, to highlight to the user that we are on page 1, we are also going to highlight the products link at the top. This is because we are on the all products page, so it makes sense to let the user know which page is active. For this, back to the editor and scroll up to the products link at the very top. And then inside the classes, we'll start by adding the background to be grey-500. And this now lets the user know that the products page is now active. So the small screen setup is now complete. Coming up, you will learn about more of what Tailwind has to offer, including responsive design. Responsive design is not just a nice thing to have on modern day websites, it's an essential part of development. We need to make sure our design looks good on small screens, right through to a large desktop size. Thankfully, since there is thousands of different screen sizes out there, we don't need to create a separate design for each one of these sizes. But instead, we do need to apply some sensible rules to cover us for all screen sizes. When we add regular CSS, we have access to media queries. A common use for media queries is to section off certain styles to only apply to certain screen sizes. And Tailwind also has built-in utilities for this too. An important thing to understand is that all of the utility classes we have already applied will apply to every screen size. You can think of these as general base styles. Building on top of these, we can then add specific styles for certain screen sizes. Looking at this top row, for example, bear in mind that all of the current styles we have are applying to all sizes. And then, once the browser hits a width of 640 pixels or above, we can add new styles or override the ones we already have. We maybe want a bigger font, more spacing, or a complete layout change. And for these changes to apply, we use the same utility classes as before, but with the SM prefix. And since we're working with mobile first, these styles will apply all the way up to larger screens too, unless we again override them by using another prefix such as LG for large screens. Each one of these browser sizes is called a breakpoint, since this is the point we could change the styling or the layout. We already know from this wireframe how the bigger screen view will look, so how do we decide when to change a layout? Well, this is something which you do need to judge for yourself depending on each project, but a simple rule is to start with a small screen, and then scale the browser up, and make changes when the layout begins to look too stretched or broken. For simplicity, I'm just going to do one single breakpoint change, which is going to be at the large size. As you want to. This layout will basically go from having content stacked vertically to having our main two sections side by side. So moving on from this small screen view, I'm going to make a little bit more space. And if we go into the developer tools, we'd right click and inspect. And if we start to make the browser larger or smaller inside the dev tools, you'll see on the top right corner, we can see how wide it is in pixels. So currently the layout looks pretty fine when we're around 600 pixels. If we go up to 700, 800, everything still looks fine on a sort of tablet screen view. However though, if we start to get maybe around 1000 pixels or above, somewhere around here, we can see we start to need a layout change. So it's this large screen size, which is 1024 pixels, which I'm going to use to create a layout change. So let's close this down. And if we go into the code, into our index page, and remember the body section up at the top controls the layout of our two main sections. So this is the parent for both the aside, which is this top area, and also the main content too. It controls this using the flex box and set them currently to a column layout, but we can change this to be a row on larger screens. So the way to do this is to use the breakpoint prefix, and in my case, it's for the large screen view. And then all we need to do is to add our utility class. So this will change this to be flex row. And if we save this, refresh the browser, these two sections are now placed in a row. We can also see the breakpoint take place if we shrink the browser down to the smaller size. This will then make this back to the column style layout. So what we now need to do is to size our two sections, since this doesn't span the full width of the page. To size the aside and the main sections, we're going to make use of the width property. We know we can set how wide these sections are in rems, or an even better option for these sections is to use fractions. So what we need to do is to first locate the aside, and then we can set for the large screen view a width equal to a quarter. Go down and let's locate the main section. And for this, also targeting the large screen views, this will fill up the additional 3/4 of space. So now 3/4 and a quarter, let's go live inside the browser so we don't need to keep refreshing. And we can see this takes up a quarter of the screen space, and this side takes up the remaining value. This will also stretch if we make the browser wider or smaller to always be in proportion. So now we know we're working with the full size desktop screen. It would be better on this view if all the content stretched vertically to the full height of the screen. We can do this if we go to one of the sections, such as the aside, and back into the classes. Again, this will always be targeting the large screen view. We can set the height to be equal to the screen height. And this will set the height to be 100 VH, which is the full height of the viewport. So this looks a lot better. We now have a full height sidebar, and also since the main section is alongside, it's also followed the full height too. That's now it for our main layout change. You can add more breakpoints if you want to, but next we're going to focus on the content inside of these two sections. The wireframe shows on the large screen that in the sidebar section, the links are aligned to the left hand side. So we're going to begin there, and then move down through the rest of the larger screen styles. As we know, these links are inside of the UL section amongst the aside content. So let's locate our unordered list. We already have the class attribute in place, so all we need to do is to start with our large screen styling. For the small screen, we do already have some space on the y-axis between each one of our list items, but now we have more space available. I'm going to up this to be a larger value. So space, y, the value of 8. The text is going to be left aligned as we've just seen in the wireframe. So now we have some more space in between each one of these items, and we can also add a little bit of margin on the top and bottom to give it some space from the title and this icon. And we'll do this with some margin on the y-axis and a consistent value of 8. Okay, so this is better, but we also need to align the settings icon too. And let's go down to our span, which wraps this section, which is down at the very bottom under the unordered list. Inside the classes, for the large screen only, we'll set the text align to be left. Okay, good. So this is aligned over to the left-hand side, but if you do look closely, this is slightly further left than the actual text. So this also needs some padding to move this in line with the rest of the links just above. So for this, we'll add a padding left value of 2. Keeping this now in line with the rest of the links above. So I think the sidebar looks pretty good. This is all I want to do for this section. So now let's move on to the main content over on the right. Since we have more space available, let's start with some padding around this full section. This full section is the main section, so let's go into the classes here and target the large screens with a padding value of 4. Okay, this looks a little bit better, and the next thing to do is to move the avatar over into the top right corner. So I want the user's avatar and also the name to be in the corner. So over to the editor, we can look for this section. So we need to go just inside of the main section, and this is the first div at the very top. And there's not a lot to do with this section because we already have the flex property set for this section. So all we need to do is to override the layout for the large screen view. And we can do this by adding justify end. Let's move this over to the top right hand corner. And this is the equivalent of setting the justify content property to be equal to flex end. Moving down, we have the all products title and also the buttons, which I'm going to place alongside each other on the same line. So just a little bit further down, we have our title and this container for the buttons. And this is the surrounding div section just here. As we said with the comment earlier, this is the container to align the buttons and also the heading. So let's add some classes inside of here. The large prefix, and since this already makes use of the flex box and flex column, all we need to do is to make this equal to flex row. This now places both of our elements on the same row, but if you look closely, the heading is a little higher than it should be. This is because of some padding we have at the bottom from the small screen view. And for this, we need to place in an override. So this is the original margin on the bottom we have here. So we need to remove this for the large screen view by setting this to be equal to 0. Save. This fixes the alignment, and also now we have some more screen space available. We can make the text a little bit larger. So the text, let's go for extra large. Good, and finally the space in between these two sections. And since we're also using the flex box for this section, we're placing the value of justify between. So we've pretty much got the top section where we want it to be, and the next item on our list is this table. The table is not too far away from where we need it to be. However, though, it would be nice to be the full width of the screen. So let's go to our table section, which is just here. And Tailwind provides us with a class called min w-full to make this the minimum width of the screen. If you wanted to, we could also place this behind a large media query, but since it always needs to be the minimum width of the screen on all screen sizes, this looks good on the small and the large screen view. So we're almost there now, and the final section is this number of products and the links at the very bottom. All I'm going to do for this section is to place both of these items on the same row. So head to the bottom of the project. This is the wrapper section. And like some other sections, since this also uses the flex box and the flex direction of column, we can change this to be the flex direction of row. Placing these onto the same section, but we still need to add some spacing in between both of these items, and also remove some of the default margin we have on the top of our links. So first of all, we'll deal with the margin at the top of our unordered list, which is just here. We can override this to make margin top 0 for the large view, meaning all we need to do now is to justify the space to be in between both of these elements. We do this on the wrapper, so at the very end, just after we set the flex row, add the large screen utility of justify between. And this is now exactly how we want it. So this is all now done for the large screen view, and you can see how easy it is to change the layout and the content with just a few overrides. The Tailwind utility classes has us covered for most use cases, and this is pretty flexible because generally one Tailwind utility class is equal to one CSS property. But what about if we also wanted to add our own too? Well, this is also completely possible, and we can do this by creating our own style sheet. Into the project and open up the sidebar, and then alongside our index page, create a new file. And this one is the custom.css. So make sure this is alongside the rest of our files and folders. And then inside of here, we can add any class as an example. So let's call this the custom, which will set the color to be orange. So this is just regular CSS like we would normally write when we weren't using Tailwind. And this will set the text color to be orange. Then just like a regular HTML and CSS project, we can include this in the head section with a link. So just below our Tailwind CSS file, add in a new link, and the href is just the custom.css. So this should now be our file linked, and we can test this. Let's go for our level 1 heading and add the class of custom. Give this a save and over to the browser. And now we can instantly see that this custom orange class has applied to our text. So this works, and if you wanted to, you could include multiple style sheets into a project. Sometimes certain plugins or libraries have their own style sheet which you need to add, and you can do it in this exact way. Or if you wanted to, instead of having our separate files in this custom CSS file, we could instead merge these custom styles into the Tailwind file. And we can do this with a terminal command. So if you don't already have the terminal open, go to terminal and then new terminal inside of Visual Studio Code. And then from here, we're going to run a Tailwind command, which is npx Tailwind CSS. Remember, we're using the Tailwind CLI for this. So what we need to do next is -i, and then place in the file path for two different style sheets. So the first one is going to be /, and this is the custom.css. So this points to our custom CSS file, which we just created. And then we use -o, followed by the file path to our Tailwind CSS. So what this will do, this will merge our custom file into the Tailwind file. So hit enter, and we can run this command inside the terminal. We'll locate this. Back to our custom file, and we can still see that our custom class is in place. However though, if we go to our tailwind.css file, rather than all the thousands of classes which we had before, this is all being completely removed and replaced with our custom CSS. And we can also see this if we go to the browser too. We don't have any of the Tailwind styles. We just have our custom orange color for the heading. So obviously this is not right. We need a way to merge our custom styles with the original Tailwind classes. For this, what we need to do is to go to our custom CSS file, and then at the top we need to import Tailwind. To import Tailwind, we have various Tailwind directives, all which begin with the @ symbol. So we have @Tailwind, followed by what part of Tailwind we want to import. Tailwind is organized into different sections. Remember earlier we said that Tailwind has a set of base styles, which includes things like resets and styles to make our site look more consistent across different browsers. Well, to begin, we can import these base styles with base. After this, we'll also include the same Tailwind directive, but this time we're going to import the components. We'll look at the components very soon, but next we'll go for the utilities, the same Tailwind directive, and import the utility classes. And then finally, at Tailwind, we can import the screens. So screens is the additional Tailwind utilities, which begin with the screen prefix. For example, if we had a prefix beginning with SM for the small screens or LG for the large screens. This screens directive is optional, and if we leave this out, it will be automatically added in at the end of the file. So we only really need to include this if we had a use case for reordering the CSS. So now if we go back to the terminal and run the same command, press up, hit enter to run this, and then into our Tailwind CSS file, and then down to the very bottom of this file, and we see our custom CSS down at the bottom. There's only 800 lines there, so I think we've got an issue just inside of here. There's our custom style at the end. We've got the screens. This should just be utilities. Save this, and since I made a spelling mistake, I also need to rerun this command in the terminal. Okay, this is done. So let's go back over to our Tailwind file, and you can see we have a lot more styles which are now more in line with the original Tailwind file. So down to the very bottom of this file, there's our custom class placed at the very end, and this has been added in the same order as we've added all of these into our custom file. And then back to the browser, and the Tailwind styles have now been reapplied. We can also remove our custom CSS file, save them back to the browser, and our orange color will still apply because it's now been merged in with our Tailwind CSS. So that's how we can create our own custom style sheet and include it with Tailwind. And next, we'll discover more directives to help organize our styles. Previously in the Tailwind generated file, and down at the very bottom, we added our own custom class to this build. This all works completely fine, and it's fine for a lot of use cases, but we are starting to mess around with the order of the carefully created Tailwind groups. Inside of our custom file here, we have all these Tailwind groups just here. So the Tailwind CSS is generated in the order we place these in, and then our custom class is right down at the very bottom. One way of changing the order of the generated file is to move our classes around just like this. So we can move our custom file to maybe just below the base styles. And if we were to save this and go to the terminal and then rerun our generate command, this will then regenerate our Tailwind file based on this new order. Once this is done, if we go to the Tailwind file, and now rather than being at the very bottom, we don't see our custom. Let's take a search, and this is now moved up to line 603, which is just below all of these base styles. So this can help us if we need to move some CSS around, maybe to avoid any overrides, or just generally to place it in the order which we want to. Or an alternative to this is Tailwind also provides a directive to help with this. We can assign our custom class to be grouped with any of these other sections. So if our custom class was based off a utility, off a component, or we just wanted a base style for our project, we could merge this into one of these groups. And the way to do this is with the layer directive. So we create the layer using the @ symbol, followed by the name of the group which we want to merge this into. So let's go for base for this example, and then open up a set of curly braces to insert our custom code. We can grab our custom class from before and add this inside of our layer. And this can contain as many CSS rules as we want to include, so we could keep going, adding different classes, and these will all be merged into. So now save this file, and again, in the terminal, regenerate this. Over to our Tailwind file. This is on line 603 with our base styles, and if we try to change this to maybe components, then rerun our terminal command. Let's see what happens after we run this. Once this is done, back to our Tailwind file. Again, do our search for custom, and this has now been moved down to line 637, merged in with the rest of the components. So this is useful for reorganizing our custom classes, and another useful directive is apply. And we use this to create our own reusable components. To see this, let's do some cleanup work. We can remove this custom section from before, and also in our index page, let's take a look for our custom class. And this is just inside of our level 1 heading. And the orange color has now been removed. So back to this apply directive, and this is used to solve a problem with using Tailwind. The problem is our HTML file can get really filled up with adding a lot of different class names. And also we often duplicate the same classes on multiple elements. An example of this is all of these links in the sidebar. If we take a look at our inventory, for example, and we highlight all of the classes here, we can see we've used these multiple times. We've used them for the orders. Let's scroll down. We've used them for the analytics, for the customers, for the coupons. We have a lot of duplicated code inside of here. And the apply directive gives us the chance to pull out all of the HTML classes and create a reusable component like setup. So the way to do this, if we copy all of these classes from one of our links, copy these and then go over to our custom CSS file. We can start by giving this a class name of our choice. So let's go for navlink. So this looks a little bit like a normal CSS kind of setup, but what we do need to do inside is to add the apply directive. After this, paste in the utility classes which you want to include. Add a semicolon at the end, and then down to our terminal, rerun the same command. Give this a few seconds to run, and this should insert this into our Tailwind file. Okay, so let's copy our navlink over to our Tailwind file. Command or Control F to search this file. Paste this in, and now we have our navlink down at the bottom. So we've got the border radius, which we can see if we go into our section here. This is the rounded section. We have padding, we have text colors, and we also have these hover effects too. We can see inside of our Tailwind file that these hover effects have been generated. There's our padding, there's our colors, and also the color for the hover effect too. So now what we can do is go to our index page, and rather than having all of these classes inserted, we can then use our custom class which we just created, which was navlink. And then we can use this in place of all of the rest of the classes just above. So the analytics, the customers, the inventory, the orders. Be careful not to add this to the span element. And we have the products. And I think this is all of the sections which we need to replace. And now if we save this and go back to the project, make sure the browser is reloaded and all of the same classes still apply. We can confirm this if we remove the navlink from any of these elements. And this has now removed the CSS. Let's just reinstate this. And to reorganize this, we can also add this into the component group by surrounding it in the layer directive. So just like we looked at before, go to our custom file, and then cut out of place our section from before, add in the layer directive, and we'll place this inside of our components. The curly braces, and then we can paste the full section from before back inside. Down to the terminal, run the rebuild command. Let's test this out in the browser, refresh, and we shouldn't see any changes because all we've done is move this into the component section of the Tailwind CSS file. Welcome back. This video is going to take a look at a couple of useful screen reader utilities. I'm currently inside of the Tailwind documentation and in the screen readers section, which you can also find under accessibility. Screen readers are important for accessibility, and they read out the contents of our web page to visually impaired users. So if a user is visually impaired and they cannot see our website as intended, they can use a screen reader to read out the contents. And we have two screen reader utility classes which Tailwind provides. The first one is SR only, and SR only hides an element from view, but it still keeps it in place to allow a screen reader to read out the contents. We can then use not SR only, and this one will basically undo what we've just hidden and reinstate it back inside the browser. So over to the project, we're going to take a look at how to do this inside the table. Currently, inside of our rows, we have this edit button at the very end. So we also maybe don't need this edit title up at the top. This is because for a non-visually impaired user, these edit buttons are probably enough to tell them what to do. So what we can do is to hide this heading at the top, but still allow a screen reader to read it out if needed. So let's do this by locating our table. Scroll down to the required section, and inside the table head, we need to go to the end of this section to find our edit text just here. Inside the classes, we can use the SR-only class. Save this, and this heading has now been hidden from view, but it will still be read out by screen readers. Remember, we also have the not SR-only class too, which will undo this. This can also be used to show and hide content on different screen sizes, but we don't need this for our use case. So this is just a little change, but it could be really useful in your site if we have a section which we need to hide, but still keep in place for screen readers. Once we've finished our site and we're happy with the contents, we can then deploy the site using a service such as Netlify. If you want to, you can make more changes and customizations to this project, but I'm just going to leave it as it is. Netlify makes it really easy to make our project go live on the web. And to use it, head over to netlify.com. It's free to use. And if you've not used it before, you will need to go ahead and create a new free account with the sign up link at the top. Once you're logged in, you'll be taken to an admin area, which should look just like this. If you have any current sites which you've used in the past, these will be available from this link up at the top. To add a new site to Netlify, we'll have a couple of different options. If using GitHub, you can use this button at the top and link this to your repository. This has the benefit of it will automatically update each time we push any changes to that repository. Or a really simple way, if you don't have a repository set up, is to just simply drag over our project folder. This will go ahead and build our site and then give us a link up at the top, which we can click on to open up inside of a new tab. Open this up, and this will give us a live website link, which we can share with friends and family. So you can see how quick and easy it is to deploy a site using Netlify, and we can also modify this URL too. If we go into the domain settings, click on the options, we can edit our site name. Let's say my super project, and then we can save this. And now we can click on this, open this up in a new tab, and this will also point to our project. If you wanted to use a custom domain so we don't have the Netlify app at the very end, you can also follow these steps to do this with the Add Custom Domain button. And that's it, that's how easy it is to deploy a static site using Netlify.